Hi, welcome to everybody who's already joined in. We're going to give it a few minutes to the top of the hour here to let everybody else get in, and then we'll get started.
I see a few folks I recognize. How's it going, Randy? How's it going, Akash? I saw Rebecca too. Hey, Rebecca.
I forgot that's the fun part, John.
Hey, Whitney. See you too. There's a lot more names here now, though. I'm not catching anyone else.
Yeah, some familiar faces and some new ones. I'll tell you what we're seeing a lot more of is people's note takers are here. I wonder if they're actually here or not. Hey,
Got to
Whitney.
make OpenAI a revenue management expert.
That's right. It's like Otter AI is winning today. I give it just one more minute, folks. Still pouring in here, and then we'll kick it off. It's Kathy. Our day is complete. Katie's Cotton's here. All right. Well, in the interest of everybody's time, let's kick it off. First of all, great to see so many familiar names. I can't see your face, but I know how beautiful you guys are. I'm super excited about the topic today. And thank you for taking the time to join us. We're going to cover what has been dubbed as diversifying your distribution. But we've got some incredible experts, I think best in the space here, as I'm sure you guys will agree. Just on everything about distribution, how to optimize it, how to think about it, what's cool that's happening that they need to be thinking about, what's not so cool that's happening that they need to think about. And so we're going to try to jam it all in, try to keep it on time. We got a lot of questions submitted ahead of time. Thank you guys very much. That made our brainstorming about what you want to hear about incredibly easy. But let me do some introductions here first. I'm Jason Sprinkle, CEO of Key Data. I see a lot of names on there that we know. Thank you guys all for joining. And for those who hadn't had a chance to meet yet, looking forward to getting to meet you at one of these upcoming shows soon, hopefully. I've got a great panel. I'll start with our own team here, Miss Melanie Brown from somewhere right outside of the Denver area. She's our Key Data's VP of Data Analytics and Insights. Most of you have probably seen her on stage sharing tons of data about the industry. She's got some great data to share with us today, just about what's happening with the OTAs and market shares, and she'll kick us off here in just a minute. Really a pleasure to have Don Murray joined in here from Booking.com. We're gonna both pick on him and hear amazing things from him. He's got all the real answers, so we're gonna probably ask him as many questions. But listen, really appreciate you guys taking the time. We don't always get one of the OTAs to join us here and let us hit them with rapid fire questions. So thank you, Don, for being here. We got Mr. JDR, as many of you know him, or John De La Route from Wheelhouse, godfather of revenue management in the short-term rental space by all accounts. A real honor to have you here with us, John. I know you spend most of your waking hours thinking about revenue management and anything and everything that touches it for our space. So we're going to pick your brain. And then Doug Truitt, probably the leading expert out there when you think about distribution channels and how they're used across the short-term rental space. It's a very tricky topic. Doug has done it at an executive level for quite some time across a number of brands: Evolve, Rentals United, Stay Alfred, now VTrips. So when you think about the sophistication of distributing those different volumes and locations of units, probably makes you feel a little bit better about the challenges you're facing on a day-to-day basis. So excited to have you here, Doug, and appreciate all you guys joining me. I know the least here, obviously, so I'm going to try to moderate, ask some good questions. Y'all feel free to kick your questions in there, but we'll keep it moving. So let's kick it off first with Melanie, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about what you're seeing on the data side, maybe to get us moving.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, let's frame the situation a little bit. Here's why we're talking about it this year and why your distribution strategy is more important than it ever has been. In our direct source data from property managers, we get to see where reservations are being made, which is really cool. And we tend to track that pretty closely because it tells us what's changing in the space. From 2019 to 2024, we've seen an increasing number of guest reservations booked for our professional property management partners on the OTAs. So we track Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking.com, a couple others separately as well, which we'll look at here in a second. But last year, a full 60% of guests booked through an OTA. That's up from 45% in 2019. So really more guests are booking via an OTA than ever, which does make it super important to just make sure that your distribution strategy is dialed in and that you're not just solely relying on direct source bookings. And they really all bring kind of a different flavor of guest profile to the table, so they can help you fill in these gaps. Again, we're looking at 2024 KPIs for our US property manager. Generally, we see Airbnb and Booking.com reservations coming in at slightly lower average daily rates, slightly shorter stay lengths, around 3.5 to 4 days, and then a shorter booking window, so booking a month and a half in advance. Direct bookings and Vrbo on the other end of that spectrum, kind of higher rates, slightly longer stay lengths, and definitely longer booking windows. So again, important to kind of manage your distribution across all of those platforms. And we'll talk about this later, but maybe using directs in Vrbo to kind of fill your far out calendar with some long stays, and then using OTAs like Airbnb and Booking.com to fill in the gaps later. But especially with the highly competitive environment we're in right now, really important to make sure you're pulling each of these guest profiles and from multiple sites. And then, of course, kind of share shift across those platforms has changed a lot in the last few years as well. So again, we're looking at annual data from 2019 to 2024. We've seen Airbnb taking an increasing share of kind of guests in our core leisure markets. So they've really charged onto the scene there. We've seen Booking.com really grow fast over the last 6 years. So the highest rate of growth here from one reservation in 2019 to two in 2024 on an annual reservations per property basis. You know, a really important thing to note is kind of how supply factors into all of this. So Booking.com working on growing supply, and these numbers will grow as it does. And then direct kind of flat over the last couple of years, but a pretty major decline in the number of reservations being made directly when you look at 2024 versus 21 and 2022. And then Vrbo had this growth immediately post COVID as everybody kind of pivoted to beach and mountain and kind of rural destinations. And then just the last couple of years have not been as sunny for them, and we've seen a decline in Vrbo activity. So again, important to kind of understand how each of these OTAs share of the whole is shifting over time. And then wanted to pull some European data in as well, just because I think that's always helpful context for all of us. We've seen Booking.com grow really fast in Europe over the last 5 years. So I'm excited to hear from Don a little bit more about kind of how we can kind of strategies for the US, you know, takeaways there, and then Airbnb getting an increasing share of bookings as well. All this to say, you know, it does vary a lot regionally. So do make sure you're paying attention to the major OTAs in your markets. But excited to kind of have some data as a jumping off point, and excited to dive in with the rest of the group.
Awesome. I think, Don, why don't you just leave that slide up there for the rest of the show? So a couple of quick questions just to index off of that slide. And first, a comment here in the chat from Michael. I think we've talked about this a lot, but this idea that the OTAs are gaining market share versus direct, a lot of expectations out there that this is perhaps a result of kind of the COVID hangover, and that it comes back to the property manager to retain them after the first stay. You guys agree with that? You think that's the cause here? You think there's more going on? What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think I think part of it is like a little bit of a permanent shift in the sense that the OTAs are really easy to shop. The age of e-commerce is in full swing. I usually think to at least look on an OTA, even if I kind of have an idea of where I want to stay. And it is just your main storefront. Like there's no brick and mortar for travel. People aren't going to, well, actually, people are going to travel agents again. But for the most part, we shop there. And I think there's always going to be a segment of people, even established travelers who are going to be using the OTAs. It's pretty natural that that's, a permanent part of the business. But I do think for our brands, it absolutely, you know, it's also an opportunity for you. It is your opportunity to advertise your product, to get them in that first one. They spend a lot more money on marketing. It would be take you a lot of effort to get the same marketing team and have the same effect. But once you've got them in the door once, you're building your own marketing engine for off piggybacking off of them. And I think both are really important. You always have to consider the OTAs are going to be an element of your business, but anything you can siphon off in the long term is going to add to the stability of the business.
Well said. Melanie, on your chart, you showed kind of I guess, almost what looked like a flat line for VRBO lately. There was a lot of talk over the last little while about just the decline that VRBO saw in the marketplace in the US. Their transparency around the tech changes that happened, and then their promise to kind of lean in on marketing and expectation that would rise. What are you seeing if we really zoom in over the last couple of months at VRBO in terms of its trajectory?
Yeah, great question. I mean, last couple of quarters, Verbo's kind of number of reservations per property and then share of overall guest reservations in the US has been pretty flat on a year-over-year basis. So we've seen that decline slow as marketing has ramped back up. We're also now at a spot where we're a full year into this and like it's hit the bottom and it's easier to kind of preserve that on a year-over-year basis. So I think at this point, we're not really seeing growth in Verbo yet, but the bleeding has stopped to some extent. Doug, you're nodding like maybe you've seen that on your inventory.
Yeah, a little bit. I think one of the biggest things that's about Verbo that's been refreshing over the last few months and have had conversations back at Verma is that I think internally at Verbo, they've kind of had the leash taken off, so to speak, and the R&D kind of stuff is starting to become more acceptable. They're letting teams do more stuff, which I think is really refreshing for myself and others to hear, because it was for a while, for the last couple of years, it seemed like there wasn't a whole lot of innovation or new things or stuff happening. So I'm excited to see what happens coming from them, just knowing that they are starting to drum that up again and actually try to give a little more innovation and creativity to get things back.
Kent teed up a really great question here. I think the underlying point of it being, and I haven't asked this before, so pardon the surprise here, but let's have an interactive discussion. The question is like, starting out as a new brand today, you're competing against Kleenex, trying to introduce a Kleenex in there. It makes it super hard to think about gaining market share. And it seems like the obvious opportunity is to, convert the OTA's guests into your own guests on round two. But the brands that are established, kind of the in-market core brands, maybe Doug, this is a good one for you, or John, some of your clients, are they having success, do you think, kind of as an exception, maintaining their market share versus the OTAs? Or do you think this is something that's just kind of hitting everybody with the strength of the brand and the spins?
I would say that the OTA stuff, other than being kind of a permanent piece, is really a boon to the new brands. It's a way to get out there. Those established brands, I think, more anecdotally, are maintaining, and actually in an environment where it's really competitive, they seem to be doing better. Like the strength of that CRM is a huge asset to them when the markets are unstable, when they are competing for occupancy in these markets. Those big companies, when I talk to the revenue managers, they feel much more comfortable, and oftentimes they're talking about distribution or marketing plays, when in the past, 3 or 4 years ago, they would have just been talking about pricing optimization. And so if you're a newer company, leveraging the OTAs, and it's funny, I was at Darm and I felt like a lot of the topics, it was like going back in time 10 years ago when it was like, oh, use Navis, build your CRM, call people. It was like those were all coming back because it's competitive, and the OTAs aren't as new and shiny in their connectivity. And you got to think short term and long term. In the short term, the OTAs are a huge asset for your revenue management team. But in the long term, you need to be building a CRM, and the OTAs are still going to have a place for you there.
Yeah.
So Don, yeah, great. Well said, John. you guys are bringing us a new clients. In other words, we have the opportunity to convert them. So maybe it's not so much that you're losing a market share, it's that you're getting an influx of new customers, right? Certainly post-COVID, we look to you guys to keep our coffers full, so to speak. Two things jumped out at the chart for easy ones to start with, Don. First of all, booking kind of gaining the largest percentage change there in the US for market share. So first question is, what do you attribute kind of the success in the US on? And then Europe, you guys are just murdering it in terms of market share. Anything that stands out to you that accounts for that in your mind?
Well, we're making it easier for partners to work with us, but we're also still working very hard to grow our supply. We do still have some supply gaps, so that's one area that the team that I manage that we're highly focused on is getting that supply on board, but not just getting it on board. We want to make sure that they're set up for success, optimized, understanding how to work with us. Our platform is slightly different than some of the other channels. And we're doing a good job with that. We still have some work to do to get more of the supply on board, but that's one area that we see as the biggest opportunity here in the U.S. Whereas in Europe, we have done a great job at getting that supply on board, and you can see there that the numbers reflect that. So that's it's the main focus here is to get that supply on board, with it being equally important that that supply is set up for success.
Got it. And when you think about it, I know your leadership has been very vocal about really coming after supply in the US in particular, and it's been a pillar of kind of your future looking. You guys are leaning into that, like any ways in particular that jump out to you? I guess the one that stands out to me is you guys have leaned in some of the integrations, just finishing up the track integration, right?
Yes, working on some key integrations. We do have a team also that's fully dedicated to the onboarding support. So, we have heard that at times people don't know exactly how to get onto booking.com. And we have a team that is fully dedicated to helping support those groups, and hand holding also between the property manager and the provider. But that's been super helpful in ensuring that these groups are not just having a hard time coming on board, but understanding how to work with us, doing a quick audit of the listings, making sure they're set up correctly, and then set up to convert as well.
So really a question for all of you, and this is going back to your first chart, Melanie. Pretty big difference when you look at the booking patterns for the KPIs across these three different OTAs, and really as distinct from direct as well. I think you and I have talked a lot about it suggests that those are really different guest profiles in large extent that are coming in across these different OTAs. So maybe kind of quick around the horn, like when you think about Don saying they still got a ton of supply to go, you really seen Airbnb over the last year and a half add a lot of what I used to think of as the traditional VRBO supply. And now you're seeing Booking.com starting to add all those as well. How do you each think about different guest profiles and different personas from these three different OTAs, and whether it makes sense for everybody or most people to be on all three? Or how does a person that's on this call that maybe not on all three, how do they think about that decision from your perspective? Maybe Doug, kick us off.
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, and I've said this for years, going back to my Stay Alfred days, but John hinted at it too a little bit earlier, but really, these OTAs are an extension of your marketing spend and your budget. And a lot archaically in the past, the folks would be like, oh, they're stealing from my pie. They're taking money out of my pocket. But the reality is they've got more SEO dollars to spend than probably the whole entire industry of hosts can actually pay to make it happen. So adding to what your question and getting at here is really like, if you have the bandwidth and you have the resources, you should get on as many of the big channels as you possibly can, because the billboard effect is real. And more so now with the price sensitivity that has actually been happening, that is kind of now, kind of going back to like pre-COVID levels. People are spending more time looking for their vacations. They're being more price sensitive about it. They're making the best decisions by spending more time with it. We could even talk about how AI is potentially playing in that and surfacing some better reservation options or destinations. But all that to say is, like, you should be getting your brand and your integrity out there as much as possible, because that matters when they see it between platforms to where they decide to end up converting. Now, in terms of a marketplace, like everybody has a flavor, right? Maybe you had really great experiences on Airbnb, so you always book Airbnb. Or maybe you're a Genius member who gets all those, accolades and rewards on Booking.com, so you go back to Booking every time. There's just different flavors, and the reality is your product may apply to one of those more than the others, but you should be relevant on all of them in so many ways to get as many eyeballs, because the whole OTA game and distribution is about eyeballs, getting as many impressions, as many people to see your product as possible, because that's how it leads to conversion.
Excellent. John, what about you? Different flavors for everybody, but I think Doug's takeaway there was you ought to be trying them all to get the different personas. How do you think about it in terms of your customer base and experience?
Did you say John or Don?
Yeah, John, I'm sorry. I'll be clear.
Oh, yeah, you can call me JDR. That's why they do it in
ADR, okay.
Yard. I think for me, I think the biggest thing about like being on the OTAs, I don't think a lot of people really have the resources or the wherewithal yet to really intentionally be using the OTAs to target stuff. You're just trying to cast a wide net. Now, if you're an advanced revenue manager, there's some really important things around that intentionality and targeting these different market groups that maybe we'll talk about a little later. I think the first thing for most people, though, is it's risk mitigation. We've been in an environment for a long time where the OTAs are pretty stable, which is nice. But 10 years ago, you wanted to be on multiple because like sometimes HomeAway would break, right? And then like you go from making $100,000 a day to making zero for 3 days. And that still exists, though. We've seen things like Airbnb, we see regulations, we see rules change, and, or even disasters, and the rules are unclear, and that can cause your distribution to be turned off. And it's very hard to spin up distribution on a dime. You need to already have it in place. So getting onto the big three is super important just for risk mitigation, even if you're not going to optimize all of them. And guaranteed people won't have the resources to optimize more than one, maybe two, if they're really sophisticated, three. But you probably do want them there just because if something gets turned off or something breaks, you need to be able to pivot quickly. And you can't do that if it's not already set up.
More irons in the fire.
Yep.
So on that point, Don, I'm reading through all the comments here, and kind of a consistent theme I've heard over conversations. Historically, in transparency, some comments about challenges getting onboarded, right? It's tough to onboard an OTA sometimes, particularly if you have a lot of properties. The trade-off is a lot of success increasingly over the last year with Booking.com, where people are just seeing a lot of bookings come in. Some people here comment about how much money they made in particular over the last few months. How do you think about that trade-off, or can you offer anything for people who may have tried it in the past? Or
Yeah, we have gotten that feedback where it's been difficult for some groups to come on board, and we do have a team that's why they're here, is to help support that. And it's because we do ask for a lot of information, so there's good reason why it is sometimes a little more timely or time consuming to get the properties on board. But going back to just like the importance of having a diversified distribution. And Doug kind of touched on this, but there are people out there that just have their preferred channels that they book on. There are some guests also that just like to shop around. So if and they see consistency as they're shopping around, there's a good chance that they're going to feel more comfortable to book. Mobile optimization too. It's important that guests are able to easily book on a mobile device. A lot of the OTAs have great functionality for that. And then one thing that we do really well at Booking is we're great at converting that habitual hotel booker into a vacation rental booker. So these are guests that aren't usually planning to book a vacation rental, but they come on our site, and I'm easily able to find those.
chance to bring a different persona to the table.
I had a quick question for you, Don, and maybe it's an idea too. I don't know, but I was thinking about with some of the comments that folks are making, and I saw someone mention about property descriptions and getting certain things like that. And there are certain things that I know about from my experience with like the profile stuff for the about this property, about this profile, where you have some areas where you can do some open text stuff to give a little more descriptions, that machine learning or the AI piece that takes your amenity tags and builds your profile for your listing, you can help with. Does Booking.com have any kind of like list of consultants or experts that could help people with some certain optimization things that might be some of those pain points that they have. Because I know like Wheelhouse does an amazing job of having like, folks that they can have people be like fractional revenue managers or help, find people to help connect the dots for folks. Does Booking have anything like that?
My team is that's what they really are hyper focused on, is getting the supply on, but also ensuring that they're set up for success. We do have support also to help ensure that these newer partners are getting the support that they need, that they understand what the basic optimizations are on our side, and how that's so important to start off with those instead of adding those later. And also just the tooling, it's in Booking, and that's covered in the training. We have an opportunity center in Booking where a property or partner can go in and look and see what all opportunities that we've found that we highly encourage. If they want to increase conversion, those things can either be pushed through a provider, or it can be added through our bulk editing tool with a couple of clicks in the extranet. And then the performance of that can also be easily tracked in our analytics. But in regards to like people helping and having direct conversations with that is the goal when we bring people on, is to ensure that they know how to work with us, they understand the differences between us and the others, and that they know what information they have access to. So yeah, that's not something that we've always had, is that much support on that, but it's something that we now know that is key and has been working for us.
Yeah, well, glad to foster that dialogue. And if we've done nothing else today, we've exposed the man behind the man. So now you guys know his name's Don Murray. All
Can
right,
I interject there real quick?
Yeah, please.
Oh, Melanie, were you going to say something too? I thought I saw you.
Go ahead.
You did mention something, Don, that I think is really valuable, and it was that mobile piece. One of the reasons why the OTAs are always going to have a place is PMs are focused on a lot of different things, and the actual buying experience is not always something that's very high on the list. Something that people should invest in. You should think of your direct as a channel, your website, and that's I always tell people, like, don't invest in building your own software unless it's your website. But the mobile thing, I think, is a big piece, and it's the OTAs spend a lot of money making mobile buying accessible. We don't. And, if Gen Z ever gets some money, like, I imagine we'll see a bigger and bigger shift. So long term, that's going to be a huge benefit. Along that same kind of point, I saw in the chat, Oliver mentioned a good point too, which goes into that buying experience thing. Is Oliver mentioned that he always checks an OTA listing to get an idea of the reviews, even if he's going to book direct. So it is another source of reputation for you. That is third party, and another reason why that presence is going to be really valuable. And I think that ties into just that focus of the OTAs on the buying experience is something that you're probably not investing in, and you can take advantage of by diversifying into these OTAs.
Excellent point. All right, let's kick over to a thought that Michaela brings up here. It's outside of the big three. I mean, my takeaway from that quick conversation was Don's team is focused on making it as easy as possible to get everybody on board. And the general consensus is different personas, different locations, different flavors. You tend to seem to be leaning towards you should be trying all three, but it goes way beyond that when we think about OTA opportunities these days. I'll throw a couple out there, and then maybe we can do around the horn. There's some luxury focused ones, Homes and Villas by Marriott, 1-5 Stay, Plum Guide, those kind of folks. There's regional marketplaces that you're seeing more and more of, the Smoky Mountains.com kind of platforms. There's the meta searches. There's the super niche ones. Melanie, we talked a lot about, like, just the ones that are specialized in pet friendly, for example. There's whim stay type that are really super focused on last minute bookings. There's Amex now. There's mid stay, right? It seems like an endless subcategory of OTAs. A real balance between kind of the operational burden of getting up and running and then staying up and running versus the benefits. How do you guys think about it once you go past the first three rungs, where you should make an investment and where you should not, depending on your flavor? Doug,
Yeah. I mean, I think the practical approach that I usually look at when considering new channels, or considering channels we're already on and how they're doing is really it's identifying internally for you as a company and an organization, what is the most valuable thing to you? If you're new to the game and you have a small amount of inventory, you're just starting up and you've been on a couple of the big three for a little bit and you're, doing stuff, like it's not necessarily like how much revenue necessarily am I generating from it. It's how much eyeballs, how many views, how many clicks, what am I getting? Because that's exposure, and you're needing exposure to get your brand out there and get your product out there. I think for some of the other channels that are a little more niche, when you get into like with like Marriott Homes and Villas, that I guess is not niche anymore, but definitely it's more luxury. They have some vetting processes, and they have inspections, and they have recurring things, and they have a little bit, maybe you have a higher maintenance of a customer that causes you more work that you have to put onto it. So the revenue may be good, but how much cost are you spending on logistical stuff and operation focused and other things? So those are the pieces I think about. Also too, if you get like a channel out there you think about, or it's, spamming you, you're getting a bunch of stuff, go get a free trial account with SimilarWeb, or sign up for it and look at what their actual websites are doing, both from a mobile and a desktop experience. Like, are they getting a ton of eyeballs? Are they getting a ton of traffic? Like, how are they ranking? What are they doing? And that can help make your decision a little bit too on what you choose to continue moving forward with, or get on to something new.
Melanie, you think about forward-looking product. I'm always wanting to announce things before they're out or vision things downstream. We get a lot of questions about like other channels outside of the top three and direct. How are you thinking about like our ability to split those out? Or are you seeing any that are popping up that are surprising? Anything interesting there, or anything we can look forward to?
Yeah, I mean, we dug in again recently. Home to go is a big one that you hadn't mentioned yet, Jason. I think that one's growing. Honestly, home to go, Marriott Homes and Villas are the only ones that really have enough of a share of our direct reservations at this point to talk about. And still on a year-over-year basis, it's so little data that it's so volatile. I guess I would encourage everyone, I think this was to your point earlier, Jason, understand like what's unique about your inventory, and then on top of that, what's unique about your market. Like if you were really trying to get 30-day stays during the off season, like think about one of the midterm platforms. Or if 99% of your homes are pet friendly, go explore one of those. And then Jason, you mentioned like there are some regional platforms out there as well. We also, this group talked about yesterday about like talk to your DMO, your destination marketing organization. A lot of them have web landing pages that at least your name is out there. So you may not be able to book through the DMO, but to Doug's point, it gets more and more eyes on your property. So I would say like big three is a great place to start. So Vrbo, Booking.com, Airbnb, and then outside of that, it's kind of a choose your own adventure situation.
Well, on behalf of our data team, I would encourage you to try not to spell, booking.com and Airbnb 57 different ways. If you're trying to figure out what's going on with your booking channels, working with your PMS partner and your internal team to normalize some of your data will give you better insights.
Reservation type cleanup you're talking about?
Yeah, it'll certainly make Melanie's team's job easier. John, what would you say in terms of all these other choices and how people should think about approaching it?
I'm not too bullish on all the small ones. I think there's a place for them, but scaffolding up distribution channels takes investment and time. I think for most property managers, they're not going to get much out of it. You have to really match the target market to what your product is. You should ask those OTAs like how much are they investing in search, because they're a marketing company for you. Are they investing? What is their search stuff? If they're not willing to share it, maybe don't waste your time unless it's super easy. Now, the other end of the coin is I do think that there's a space for some development on the OTA side. We haven't seen it in a little while. They all kind of came on the scene and crystallized, but there's a few business models that disappeared. The general just listing model disappeared. I kind of like these. I think maybe instead of a big broad one, we might see more, closed networks like Marriott Homes and Villas. The credit card companies I think are really interesting. And again, they're an OTA that not everyone needs to adopt in the same general way like the big three. They're going to be specific, like do they match the demographics of your property? I'm also big on I think there's a big space for the regional ones. A really tailored experience to help people plan their trips. So I'm open to like seeing these, but I don't think that we've seen like the next ideas haven't really fully come to fruition, and you really have to judge if it's worth the time you need to invest to make those channels work before you adopt them.
Awesome. Good, good feedback.
Two points I wanted to add just real quick. Just thought about too is one of the common practices that I do, at least for the publicly traded channels, is I do review their earnings calls and their reports, and you can actually get some really good financial data where you can look at like year over year marketing spend, how much they just spent. And I know it's a big high level aggregate of it, of all of it, because there's lots of things that go into those budgets. But if they're spending a significant amount of money more on marketing, odds are majority of that spend is probably going towards SEO and what they're doing with that. So that's a good indicator to see with it. I love our friends at Airbnb, but I know that Airbnb was so focused on supply for a while that their increases on marketing spend for a while was not as high as like Booking.com's was. And I think that showed up a little bit in channel shift and some of the things I saw. But the other thing I wanted to mention too about other channels is be careful about the robbing Peter to pay Paul situation. And I'm sorry, Don, I don't mean to be offensive, but a lot of market managers and things like that for certain channels like Booking.com will really push like, get this genius discount, get this promotion, get this thing, do this thing. And you have to be very leery about that because one, it erodes from your bottom line in so many ways because you're stacking things and doing stuff. But two, in a lot of ways, you might be just shifting channel share from one to the other that you're already on, which causes a lot of work that really isn't benefiting you in net new customers all the time. I mean, some of the programs can give you some net new customers, but not always. A lot of times it's just shifting share from those high demand dates you may have. So
Perfect. Good feedback. And look, a lot of questions being answered by people out there in the audience for other people in the audience. One of the things might come out of this is just thought exchange between the group here. Maybe somebody can set up a Slack channel if we can get this thing going for future discussion. All right, let's totally shift gears for a second. Go to Airbnb for a minute. Quality, reviews, delisting. What the hell's going on? What are y'all seeing? John, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, but I'm just gonna tee up Doug because he's the expert.
Okay. Perfect.
Airbnb, a lot of changes this year, both in how they're displaying stuff. But I think the big one I keep hearing from folks is that Airbnb has become much more punitive, almost taking a card out of the Expedia playbook. And they're not doing a good job of telling you that they're being punitive. So people are finding that their listings aren't actually bookable. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other stuff there, but I think that's a really interesting thing for us to talk about because we've gotten used to OTAs being so stable that we kind of forget the mantra from earlier, which is just make sure your listing's live. Like, do you know it's live? Check that every day because it could be broken. So, Doug, what are your thoughts on what's going on, though? I think you know more since you actually have to talk to people about it.
Yeah. So Airbnb released a thing that internally, I guess, is called the Opportunities Report. In which they, for a lot of hosts, I think maybe it might be mostly in the pro host, but I think it's everywhere. But they are taking a hard look at what they call trip issues. And what they deem as trip issues can be pretty broad. It can be bad experiences. It could be safety and health concerns at the property, like something's broke with a hot tub or electrical stuff or air conditioning, or it could be a lot of barrage of things. And the hard part is that although it's nice in so many ways that it helps to keep the supply quality good within the search results and keeping, good hosts and good players doing the right things, getting as many bookings as they can. It is very difficult and frustrating on the logistical side to actually know what to spend time and attention on because there's not really a really good proactive way to actually say, I need to spend this time on this market or these cities or these listings or whatever in order to make sure that they don't get removed from the platform. So the program actually goes into what they call at-risk of removal on certain situations, where they'll actually give you a period of time that you can waive or appeal for those things to get the listing back. And if you don't meet those requirements and those documents and all the things they need to do that, they will remove your listing permanently. And based on their policies, you won't be able to relist it for upwards of a year. And even when you do, there's secondary layers of appeal processes to do it. So it makes it very logistically tough to actually deal with it. I personally believe a lot of this came from a place where they invested so heavily in supply after COVID, with people with all that pent up COVID demand money. Some people were doing lavish vacations. Other people were actually buying their first time vacation rental home. And for those folks doing that, having a nice new property and a good thing, it flooded a lot of supply in there. But there was also a lot of folks that brought in some bad supply to the platform that was causing problems. So that's kind of where it's been. There's also the suspensions. There's also penalties on owner initiated cancellations, all kinds of things that they seem to be really focusing on quality, which is doing some interesting things in certain markets, I think, in terms of like supply and performance and appearance and search results. So
Super helpful. Thank you very much, Doug.
Yeah.
Let's shift to another big topic in the interest of time here, cancellation. And Don, I'll kick it over to you. Lots of conversation always about, how do I optimize my relationship with the OTAs, booking in particular in your case, to make sure I'm minimizing the chance that I'm going to get cancellations coming through. And I've talked about payments as one of the components. Kind of how do you think about it from bookings perspective?
Yeah, there's a few different ways. First and foremost, having the correct rate plan set up, where you have two separate rates running with two separate policies. One with a flexible policy that's a slightly higher rate, and then a non-refundable rate that runs alongside that. That's a slightly discounted rate. That's one great way to not only see a higher conversion, but also can minimize the cancellations, because you have some guests that they're most concerned about a lower rate. They'll book that non-refundable rate. And then there's some that just need that comfort. They want the flexible policy and they're willing to pay more for it. If you look at like payments by booking, we highly recommend that. It's been out for a couple of years now. So if you're not currently using it, we highly recommend it. It's a no-brainer. You'll perform better with less work. But it can also help reduce cancellations in a few ways. We verify the guest credit card to ensure that it's valid, but also that it's not a fraudulent card before we process the reservation. So once the reservation is processed, then it's based on your cancellation policy. And once that cancellation policy, that free time expires, the payment is guaranteed. So that includes a no-show. So those are a couple of ways that I would suggest on tackling some of those high cancel rates.
Yeah, all right. Two good actionable takeaways. Doug, what are some other strategies you might use here to impact? You had mentioned before time-based cancellation policies. How does that work?
Yeah, so booking.com, I think, is one of the only channels that I've come up against that actually does this well. But you can actually, my prior employer at Romy was in downtown New Orleans, and obviously there was Taylor Swift, and there was Super Bowl this last year, and when I was there, we were actually proactively getting more availability out farther than a year out just to get those early bookers. And we've come to find with booking.com that you can actually set specific date specific for non-refundable. So we actually activated that for that. It was a little bit tricky to get to, but we worked with our rep and found the right way to do it. And you can do it self-service on your own, but you can make a specific stay date non-refundable while protecting the rest of all your other dates out there that you want to have the more flexibility. So it was very beneficial because it allowed us, from researching with Super Bowl, is like a lot of folks would book stuff far out in advance and then they'd cancel it right before the free cancellation time and try to hope for a lower rate or put inventory in this weird flux of up and down. And the same thing for like Taylor Swift as well. But that was really beneficial. It was a really great strategy.
Talk me through like the actual logistics of when you would employ it and when you think like, okay, now you're just getting too fancy and you're trying too hard, it's not worth the return. Like, do you look for just super peak days, like major events, or are you taking like
Yes.
peak week and spring break and trying to do it? How are you implementing it?
Yeah, you should be thinking about it with known demand things that you kind of count on for bread and butter. Think about things like there's Mardi Gras celebrations in several markets, right? There's the spring break stuff. There's hot dates on certain things that you're going to get it. So you should be willing to actually make that a non-refundable on those dates, or make it as strict as you possibly can for those stay dates. That's really what we think about. What I've thought about in my past is like, what are those demand dates? We know we're going to get it no matter what, and we want to protect it for what we're selling at it, and not put any risk on fallout that causes us to compromise our ADRs.
Yeah, I'm also going to add real quick onto that. Yeah. You can lock it in at a very high rate as well. So you can have that non-refundable at a high rate, and if for some reason it doesn't sell, you always have the option to loosen up that policy later if for some reason you did not lock it in. So yeah, great point, Doug.
And it should all vary based on the properties. you're controlling your cancellation rates for, right? Like your large homes should have a more restrictive cancellation policy where maybe they're not allowed to cancel more than 6 months in advance versus your small condos that people are booking last minute can be a little more flexible. So again, important to kind of understand the segments you're managing as well.
Is that a booking window play essentially, Melanie?
100%. So your 5-bedroom house that's like an extended family is going to book much further in advance. And so if they cancel 30 days out from arrival, like the other big groups have already booked. And so you're much less likely to pick up a new cancellation or a new reservation to replace that cancellation.
Don mentioned kind of having a non-refundable rate. Like I didn't see that forever. And then it seems like everything you go by these days, airline's probably the best example that jumps out. Always a non-refundable rate that's right there next to your refundable rate. Are all of you thinking about that as kind of a low-hanging fruit, or is that pretty sophisticated in terms of the team?
I think it is sophisticated, but I also think that it's totally doable, and it's one of those things with how you manage your bandwidth as a company, and the returns on it can be very beneficial. I mean, more options for people keeps them on the page longer to consider things. Whereas if they saw one thing, they might bounce and go somewhere else.
Where if you had to do one thing to improve cancellations, where would you start, Don? Payments?
Payments for sure for many reasons, but it does help with cancellations. I was just thinking of something else I was going to mention, just lost it. But yeah, payments can definitely help with the cancel, and also Melanie was talking about the different timeframes on when to set those cancel policies, and that's really important to know what your local booking window is, with the goal of being as competitive as you can be on policy, but also being careful so that you're not going to be stuck with an empty room. The goal is to resell that room. But in regards to the non-refundable rate, that's what I was going to mention, is that's very easy to set up on our end. You can go in and add that in bulk in the policy section in our extranet with a couple of clicks for all of your properties. And then you can select what discount you want off of your flexible rate or your standard rate, and it would automatically apply.
We'll get the right email out there. A couple people asking if they can learn exactly how to do that. So we'll make sure you get the steps on that. Okay, really helpful conversation there. Let's talk about, I don't know what to call it, I guess the reconciliation process as a whole, right? You've got you got Airbnb, clearly merchant of record, go in there and just I think you all said it in a different way, but just deducting fees automatically. I think VRBO bills you at this point. Booking.com, not in the same category of punitive nature. Thank you, Don. I don't know if you had anything to do with that, but when we think about, used to be you could just set your stuff up and you got your money and that was it. It is a different day out there for managing your OTA listings. How do you think about, just at the highest level, reconciliation and the need for it, and where do you start? Like, Doug, maybe.
Yeah. This is one that I discovered and put some really good time and effort towards it back in my stay Alfred days. But from a revenue management perspective, revenue managers are really focused on conversion and getting bookings in and looking at pickup and what did they get? What did they get? And a lot of revenue managers don't think about protecting that revenue once they've already gotten it. And I think one of the big things that happens, especially with all these channels, is that when in most cases they generate a booking for you, it's like, here's your booking, there you go. And there's system of record at that point where things are logged and tracked and billed for and everything else. It's up to you and your company to reconcile both two things. One, what's coming in and what's going out. So on Airbnb, those batch settlements that you get on the arrival dates, they go to your ACH and your bank. You need to be able to reconcile those to the individual reservations and make sure that they line up and you got what you were supposed to get. The other part is for like Booking.com, when Booking.com delivers you a booking, there isn't really a great way to communicate back to Booking.com to say, hey, that booking canceled, so don't charge me the commission on that cancellation. There are some components with it that can help, but you will get a invoice for the end of that month of the stay dates. I think it's check-in date, I believe, right, Don? Or checkout date is the invoice. But you'll get that on like the first or second of the next month from the previous month that it's regarding. And you have 5 days where you can go into the system and you can modify each reservation's commission or based on the reasoning of saying, well, this booking actually canceled and we refunded them. You can make those things so your bill gets trued up. And if you don't do that, you're paying out money to where it shouldn't be. And I know Don feels very passionate about this, but making sure it's done right. But it's a two-way street on that side. If the booking gets delivered and it cancels, we've got to go and make sure the booking knows about that so they don't charge a commission. And if they don't, you got to make sure you reconcile your books. And it's very lucrative. Very lucrative. Stay Alfred's not a company anymore, but I can tell you with 3,000 units back then, we were averaging somewhere between $40,000 to $50,000 in actual savings by reconciling our bills every month.
I'd wager to say that probably nobody out there, maybe a handful, have a senior director of channel optimization. What's the most important takeaway for everybody here in terms of the reconciliation process? I guess what I'm hearing, number one, is do it.
Download your invoices. Download your invoices, schedule the date to do that. Download your invoices and then look for discrepancies in terms of reservation status and check in and check out dates. Look at those three variables. And if there is something out of parity between the reservations you had from that channel or that invoice or that bill, that's where you need to spend your time and go figure out what happened to make sure that you are paying the appropriate amount.
So it's not
or
just
that you receive the appropriate amount.
it's not just doing it. There's a timeliness component that's critical, or you get into kind of an appeal process that makes it
A support ticket that goes somewhere where, sorry, Don, but going to take several weeks before you get a response from somebody. And then by that time it can get lost.
on the calendar and make it a critical process.
Yeah. And I wanted to mention too, though, you don't have to wait until the second to have that 5-day window. You can reconcile as the guests check out. But if you have a process where you want to do all the reconciliations for the previous month's checkouts, then it does need to be done by the 6th of each month. But some do it as the reservations check out. Some prefer to do it all at the same time. But yes, we definitely don't want to invoice for business that was not collected. But whenever a partner reconciles, it's basically telling us what we are to bill for. And if the reconciling's missed, we're not even aware that it wasn't reconciled. So it's so that's how that could accidentally happen. So highly recommend, super important that you are reconciling so that we're billing you correctly.
Yeah, the foundation of the partnership is built on getting the accounting right, but you got to schedule it and take care of it to get it right at the end of the month. John,
yeah, the reminder is like, some of these systems for invoicing were built off of different models. We have so many touch points with the customer that aren't just like a front desk or aren't just in a very short amount of time. Like people will book 8 months out, they'll change their stay, they'll move things around, they'll ask for different stuff. Things will happen during the stay. All those extra touch points give you opportunities to just make sure you're getting billed correctly, but it also forces you to have to pay attention to those because not every business that booking.com is working with has the same things happening, but they have a process for you to be able to deal with it, which is good.
Sheila making the point you made there, Don, you can keep up with them as you go if it's easier for you, right?
Correct.
Okay. Quick question from Amy. Maybe this is a good one for you, Doug. You got owners who see those things pop in, and then it's like those spikes at the rental car return where you're not allowed to back up and get rid of it. It seems like just an education process with owners, I would suspect. How do you think about kind of setting the tone with owners about, cancellations and how they should think about it once they see a booking?
Yeah, it's actually been a very big focus recently for us in terms of like the penalties and stuff that come up with cancellations and how the whole piece works. I mean, Vrbo, for example, will actually penalize you if you mark it as a host initiated cancellation. And you're charged a fee and your listing will actually get suspended. And the first time you do it, it's 7-day suspension. Second time and anytime after that's 14 days. And I think the education part that we're doing with a lot of our owners is saying, look, we want to be all good partners and provide great guest experiences for everybody. So setting up those expectations ahead of time within your agreements with owners, making sure they understand what those min rates are, max rates, everything that's there is very dialed in to hold accountability and make sure you're all operating in good faith and partnership. Because there's a lot of times where you may have to, as a revenue manager, get your rates down low, and an owner may not like that and forget that they agreed to certain mins and they want to cancel the booking. And it's like, well, come on, like we gotta work together on this and protect those things and make sure we're doing the right thing for these mutual guests. but I think it's just a matter of transparency of what the partnership is with the owners, and also the limitations of what the channels are going to do and the penalties that are there.
What do you, on that point, what do y'all see for the future if you had to look at the tea leaves for VRBO and their move to being the kind of the merchant of record, or whatever the appropriate term is? Anything you're hearing?
Yeah, I think they've been trying to do it for a while, and I think they're definitely gonna continue to keep making it happen. I think that we'll start seeing probably by the end of this year, majority of the platform, I would imagine, would be merchant on record, would be my guess, if they're successful at getting it done. And it's not a bad thing. I think merchant on record is a great thing, but and no offense, Don, but I think there's some of the channels have done merchant on record. We need to go back to the drawing board on some of the parts, because the cash flow to some of the businesses is really tough on doing merchant on record. Meaning, if you have to wait all the way till the arrival date and you're counting on some of that upfront deposit money to take care of certain things during slow season, soft season, shoulders, that kind of stuff, it's pretty detrimental. So I think if some folks, channels can actually figure out a way to make funds available when the cancellation policy goes non-refundable, or other avenues that potentially can make it easier for adoption. There's lots of upsides on fraud prevention, from loss of bookings, which impacts your ability to rebook, and also ADRs, everything too. So I think for me, it would be great to have it, but we need to get something to help the businesses.
And nuanced on, because it's somewhat semantics, but there's some important stuff here. Like, you guys aren't truly merchant of record, and you have the option to go with payments, but it helps with cancellation rates. But is there a timing issue there? Like, how do you think about it? What advice would you give us?
Timing is like in regards to when to add it, or
Well, so two questions there, I guess. I think if I understood Doug's point, like, it's when you first go on to a merchant of record situation or switch to payments, whatever, like, there is a time period there where you've got a shift in your cash flow that you just have to be prepared to account for. I think I've heard John talk about in the past, like, if you're in a state where you can't touch those escrow accounts anyway, like North Carolina, probably doesn't matter. If you're dipping into your escrow accounts, may create a cash flow. But it's, and again, my ignorance here, is it, you have to wait until the entire period before the funds are yours effectively, or when should they think about the timing there?
yeah, it is. The payment it's wire transferred on day of arrival. We are looking into some other ways, and it's based on feedback. So it is still fairly new, even though it's a couple of years old. So there are some enhancements that are being discussed right now and on the table.
Awesome.
But it also just comes with additional perks. There's additional methods payment methods that guests can have, so they can choose their own payment method a lot of the times. There's zero risk of a chargeback. That's huge. It even comes with a slight ranking boost, just because we can confirm that properties perform better with this. And then right now it's actually free. There's no charge, no transaction fee for this product. And that's at least until the end of this year. We're not sure when we will be doing that, but we do know that it would never be something that we would want to profit on. It would just be to cover that cost. And really it's the amount of time that it can save as well. But going back to the original question though, of the cash flow thing, that is something that we're looking at. But a lot of the groups that we've talked to, their main concern wasn't the cash flow. It was just being confident that they were going to get that money later, even though it was being paid later. And once that free cancel time frame expires, it is guaranteed payment. So
Okay, that's the point about the timing. You have to wait for it, but it's locked in.
Correct. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, well, you get some shout outs for your flexibility. So kudos to you guys. I'm glad to hear y'all are tackling it. So
Can I comment on that, Jason?
Yeah, please.
I'm going to just play a little devil's advocate to Doug. I think I do not think the cash flow situation, like, business grew a lot. It was very, kind of Wild West, but I don't think it's good customer centric to be dipping into the revenue that hasn't actualized. I think COVID, a lot of people got away with it because everything was messed up, but a lot of consumers got screwed by that situation. I think it's not. I would support like national trust rules, honestly. Now, the interesting thing is these payment systems being bigger, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of the OTAs offering financing on your own revenue. potentially to get around that. Like if everyone's required to hold their stuff in trust, you maybe can access it, and that might open up some opportunities for particularly mid-sized companies. So anyway, tell your friends at booking.com that that's an interesting idea if you agree.
I'm curious too, maybe people can throw it in the chat if they've been able to get financing based off that pretty predictable revenue stream once that's locked in. So a good other option. And I know all of us felt it during COVID. So fair point there, John. All right, in the interest of time here, maybe just in around the horn wrap up here, like managing your OTA listings is an amazing opportunity to get revenue out there and have new people come in your door, but it's also increasingly tough, right? Like I feel like we could talk for 3 hours here and pick your brains. First of all, y'all are an incredible panel. I think one of the most thoughtful I've ever had the pleasure to moderate. So thank y'all for being here. But if you just had to have kind of a takeaway piece of advice for OTA revenue management strategy each, what do you think is the most important takeaway for you? Why don't you start, John?
I mean, this is going to be general, but just intentionality. It takes a lot of resources. It's worth the payoff, but don't just scattershot your efforts everywhere. Really decide what you're trying to do, decide who you're trying to target. We didn't talk too much about this, but if I were going to use booking.com, I know they have a great European audience. I know I can do promotions that target just Europe. I would use booking.com, where maybe I know it costs me more, but I can try to target a specific segment I'm not getting. So just be very intentional about who you're trying to target. I think that's how you're going to get the best results. And talk to your revenue manager. We talked a lot about cancellation. From the distribution perspective, it doesn't live in a bubble. Like it's totally related to your rate strategy as well. So your teams who are doing the marketing and the distribution and the revenue should all be working collaboratively on these pieces.
Thank you very much. Melanie, what do you have as your biggest takeaway? And then if you could throw in the answer to some of these questions about how do we know where these things booked when we collect data from direct? How do we have booking source?
Yeah, so key data comes through as a marketing source on a lot of your reservations. Jason mentioned this earlier. We do normalize that. So if you're looking at your own data in your dashboard right now, it's going to say booking or booking.com or booking.com. And like our team goes in and normalizes all of that. So I'm pretty sure it's coming soon to our pro data dashboards where you can see normalized market data as well. I'm going to take the recommendation in the same direction as John and recommend like at least an annual gap analysis of your guest profile and how your properties are doing. Like maybe you're really good at getting week-long stays, but then you have some long weekends here and there that aren't ever booking. Or maybe you get a lot of large families, but you don't get couples coming to stay in your one-bedroom condo. Like do a little guest profile and segmentation work and then think about which OTA is going to capture that new audience for you. Kind of fill out your calendar and your units for the year.
Awesome. Don, what do you recommend? What needs to stick with people today?
Yes, just understanding the importance of having a diversified distribution and the difference between the channels. All the hard work that goes into getting these listings to book, it's crucial that you have as many eyeballs on those properties as possible. And then having them optimized from the start. When you come on Booking, you start off in a mid-tier ranking, so it's important to be competitive right from the start so that you don't fall in the ranking. It's easier to maintain than to play catch up later. And then in the content, our AI trip planner, that's something I haven't discussed yet, but that's an AI tool that is super important. So you want to have all of your facilities updated because in this tool, it allows guests to tell us exactly what they're looking for. And this AI tool will automatically apply filters and narrow down their search to help them find exactly what they're looking for. So if the amenities aren't up to date, you could be missing out on bookings. And then consider that rate plan mix, like I mentioned, having a non-refundable as well as a flexible policy in place. And then lastly, I'll end it with don't overthink the value or the cost of a good connection, a good software connection, because a solid software connection will easily pay for itself, and there's a lot of good ones out there. So highly recommend to not try to be too conservative on looking at which of those will work best for you.
Awesome. Doug, bring us home. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a petition to Milo to get you to do a Friday webinar every week on this, given your expertise. But what sticks with you the most?
I think what sticks the most is what it's done for years with me, which is, OTAs are an extension of your marketing strategy. They are revenue arteries that aligns with your revenue management team strategy. And I think that the biggest thing that I've learned over the years is that being on more platforms that have extranets and have other metrics and other systems and rules that they do helps strengthen your knowledge of your own inventory and the value proposition of your product. So Airbnb may have the opportunities report that is really tough and logistically difficult to deal with, but it may shed some light on some of the things you need to work with your owners on. Booking.com has property page quality scores that tells you a little bit of insights about your resolution of your photos, your amenity strengths, your tags to your amenities and photos. All of those things you can leverage to use for everything, and more importantly, for your own direct business as well. So I think keeping that at the forefront of the mind and not thinking that the OTAs are trying to steal from your pie, and they are what you're going to put into it. And if you put a lot of effort in understanding what they're doing and the rules, it's going to help strengthen your strategy on what you're selling as your product, because your product should be for tons of different people. And I think going back to what Melanie said, and John, I agree too, but knowing your customer, you need to know who your customer is, and you need to know how you can actually leverage that across all the different revenue arteries that are channels.
Awesome. Thank you for your expertise, Doug, John, and Melanie. You guys are beloved in the space, so thank you for taking the time out to join us. And Don, not every OTA wants to get in the direct line of fire, so I appreciate you willing to just sit down with us and talk straight with us. Hopefully y'all found that helpful. I thought that was an incredible session. Y'all taught me a ton. So we will get the information out to y'all. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you have a great rest of the day. And thank you guys for being on the panel today.
Thank you. And thank you, Jason.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Bye.